In the late 1700s, on the Great Plains of the American West, the Dakota Indians lived peacefully among all the various tribes of the region. The Dakota enjoyed a rich life hunting in the forests and on the plains trapping and fishing in the rivers. Their bond with the land was strong, deep, and spiritual. They worshipped it as the creator and sustainer of life. To the Dakota, the land was everything. The year was 1805, the lands of the upper Mississippi and what was to become Minnesota. The native people of this richly forested land were about to make a fateful error. They were about to strike a deal with the American explorer, Zebulon Pike. Pike wanted the tribe to allow the U.S. military to build a fort and trading post just a few miles away from the principal village of Kaposia. The Dakota were wary of permitting such a strong alien presence in their midst, but they were eager to trade their furs for blankets, firearms, and other manufactured goods. Pike convinced them that trading with the Americans would be good for the tribe. In 1819, Fort Snelling was constructed, attracting dozens of American traders. Over the next decade, life would rapidly change for the Dakota.
These two alien cultures side by side were bound to create friction. And so I think life adjustments became a little bit harder, especially for the Dakota, because we've been here since the beginning of time, and all of a sudden these aliens are coming in, and certainly there was no stopping them.
A large number of settlers developed towns along the rivers and cleared the forests. The once abundant hunting grounds of the Dakota became depleted of deer and beaver. The loss of hunting game spelled disaster for the tribe. The once self-sufficient Dakota became increasingly dependent on trade with the same settlers whose presence they had begun to deeply resent. The Dakota now looked to a new leader, the son of an influential chief. His name was Little Crow.
He cared about his people. He cared about what happened to them. He was not a fighter. He didn't want to be a fighter. He wanted to remain neutral. He wanted to get along because he knew that this is the way things were going to be. It wasn't going to be our country anymore.
In 1851, Little Crow and other Dakota chiefs met with Territorial Governor Alexander Ramsey. Ramsey presented the Dakota with a treaty that would relinquish their land. But the Dakota were reluctant to sign.
The treaty commissioners literally bullied the Indians. In other words, you better go along and get what we're offering out of it, because if you don't, we're going to take it anyway and you won't get anything.
Under pressure, Little Crow agreed to Ramsey's terms. The agreement was signed in a place called Traverse des Sioux, which became the name of the treaty. The Dakota people prepared to depart for the reservation, a narrow strip of land along the upper Minnesota River. Here the Dakota were hemmed in by growing numbers of Scandinavian and German immigrants. The Dakota were to become reservation Indians, leaving behind the rich and beautiful land they had cherished, where they had roamed for generations. Crop failure and lack of hunting game left them dependent on food and goods that were to be provided by the U.S. government as promised in the Traverse des Sioux Treaty. But the blankets and food promised in the treaty often arrived late and in poor condition. the Indian agencies refused to distribute treaty goods, while Washington delayed payment of the money owed to the Dakota. To survive, the Dakota purchased needed goods from traders on credit.
These traders of the 1850s were vultures. They kept the Indians in debt. It was a predatory system. The traders were there to make all of the profit they possibly could from the dollars that were due to the Indians, and they succeeded in doing that year after year.
1858. With most Dakota hopelessly in debt and all of their treaty money going directly to their creditors, Little Crow and the other chiefs agreed to sell the U.S. half of their remaining land. But the Dakota never saw a single penny from the land sale. All of it went directly to the traders to settle past debt. The Dakota, once thriving and self-sufficient, were now totally dependent and hungry.
Very hard to watch your child cry because they're hungry. So you get angry.
So eventually it got to the point where the warriors said, we can't sit here and watch our kids die in this manner, or our elders die in this manner, this slow death, this genocide, what they're doing.
August 1862. A hungry group of Dakota tried to break into a government warehouse full of food. Little Crow was called in to mediate. He told the Americans,
when men are hungry, they help themselves.
One trader, Andrew Myrick, answered,
so far as I am concerned, if they are hungry, let them eat grass.
These words set fire to the smoldering rage of the Dakota and triggered a chain of tragic reactions. A group of angry Dakota youth shot and killed 5 settlers. Rage and a desire for revenge rapidly overtook the Dakota. Young warriors formed war parties and urged Little Crow to lead them in battle against the settlers. Little Crow, who had long sought to find ways to peacefully deal with the settlers and their government, reluctantly agreed to lead the Dakota in what he believed was a hopeless campaign of violence. For the next 5 weeks, Dakota rage spread across the land like prairie fire. Little Crow's warriors took 250 settlers hostage and killed hundreds more. Finally, 1,600 men under the command of General Sibley descended on the warriors at Wood Lake. Though Little Crow and many Dakota escaped, they had become weary of war. Their rage spent, the Dakota warriors saw the hopelessness of their war as Little Crow had warned them. Defeated, the Dakota surrendered and released their hostages. 400 settlers had been killed. The Dakota would have to pay. Sibley headed a military commission to administer justice. Trials, however, often lasted no more than 5 minutes. In the end, the commission sentenced 303 Dakota to death by hanging. Despite the angry protests of the citizens of Minnesota, President Abraham Lincoln reduced the number of condemned Indians to 38. December 1862, Mankato, Minnesota. On the morning following Christmas Day, the condemned men marched to the gallows to be hanged. All 38 were to die at once in the largest mass execution in American history. The remaining Dakota Indians were forced to leave their ancient homeland in Minnesota for a distant reservation in what is now the state of South Dakota. The Dakota had sought an accommodation with the growing presence of Americans. They had tried to live as the American government directed, yet in the end, the Dakota were alienated from the land of their ancestors. The year was 1805, the lands of the upper Mississippi and what was to become Minnesota. The native people of this richly forested land were about to make a fateful error. The Dakota enjoyed a rich life hunting in the forests and on the plains trapping and fishing in the rivers. Their bond with the land was strong, deep, and spiritual. They worshipped it as the In the late 1700s, on the Great Plains of the American West, the Dakota Indians lived peacefully among all the various tribes of the region. They were about to strike a deal with the American explorer, Zebulon Pike. Pike wanted the tribe to allow the U.S. military to build a fort and trading post just a few miles away from the principal village of Kaposia. The Dakota were wary of permitting such a strong creator and sustainer of life. To the Dakota, the land was everything.